Pay attention to the concrete barriers going up on Route 47. It's 6:15 a.m. on March 22nd. National Guard units are establishing a perimeter around a 12-acre industrial zone in Youngstown, Ohio. The official explanation: contaminated soil remediation. Traffic is being rerouted. Businesses are being evacuated. Everything appears routine. Now pay attention to the woman in the silver Honda Accord, stopped at the checkpoint. Her name is Casey Brennan. She's 31 years old, a civil engineer with the county's Department of Public Works. She's on her way to inspect the site. Standard protocol for environmental cleanup operations. She has the proper credentials. She has clearance. She has no reason to believe this morning will be anything other than ordinary. Within 6 hours, that clearance would be revoked forever, because this wasn't a cleanup operation, it was a crime scene. Casey Brennan had worked for Mahoning County for 7 years. Her job was straightforward: assess soil contamination levels, verify remediation protocols, ensure compliance with EPA regulations. She'd done it dozens of times. Industrial zones like this one were common in Youngstown, former manufacturing sites with decades of chemical runoff, heavy metals, petroleum residue. The cleanup was overdue, but unremarkable. The site had been flagged 3 months earlier during a routine environmental survey. Soil samples showed elevated levels of lead and arsenic. The property owner, a holding company based in Cleveland, had contracted with a remediation firm. The National Guard's involvement was explained as a precautionary measure, given the contamination levels and proximity to residential areas. It all made sense. Casey arrived at the checkpoint at 6:47 a.m. A young guardsman, Specialist Kyle Richmond, checked her credentials and waved her through. The perimeter was tight. Military vehicles blocked every access point. Personnel in hazmat suits moved between trailers and equipment staging areas. She parked near the site supervisor's trailer and grabbed her inspection kit. The morning air was cold and sharp. Across the site, earth movers sat idle. Excavation had been suspended pending her inspection. That's when she noticed something unusual. The excavation pit was deeper than her paperwork indicated, much deeper. According to her specifications, remediation required removal of the top 4 feet of soil. The pit before her was at least 12 feet deep. Casey walked to the edge and looked down. The excavation team had stopped at a concrete structure. The structure was a bunker, or at least, that's what it appeared to be. Reinforced concrete walls, approximately 8 feet thick, forming what looked like an underground room. The top surface was exposed, showing a sealed hatch with industrial hinges and a locking mechanism. Casey pulled out her radio. "This is Inspector Brennan on site. I need to speak with the project supervisor immediately." The response was immediate. "Stand by." Within 2 minutes, a man approached. He was in his mid-40s, wearing a National Guard uniform with the rank of Major. He did not introduce himself. "You need to leave the site, Ms. Brennan." Casey stared at him. "I'm the county inspector. I can't sign off on remediation until I verify. Your inspection is suspended. You need to leave. Now." She looked past him toward the bunker. "What is that?" The Major's expression didn't change. "That's classified." "Classified. This is county property. Environmental cleanup is a matter of public record. I have legal authority." "Not anymore. This site is now under federal jurisdiction. Your presence here is no longer authorized." Casey felt her pulse quicken. "What did you find down there?" The Major gestured toward the checkpoint. "Someone will escort you out." 2 guardsmen appeared at her sides. They weren't aggressive, but their meaning was clear. Casey was walked back to her Honda. Specialist Richmond stood at the checkpoint, no longer making eye contact. She drove through and watched the barriers close behind her. She called her supervisor from the parking lot of a gas station 2 miles away. The conversation lasted less than 30 seconds. Her access had already been revoked. The site was no longer county jurisdiction. Federal authorities had assumed control. She was to make no statements to anyone about what she'd seen. Casey Brennan sat in her car, hands shaking. She'd been a county inspector for 7 years. She'd never been removed from a site. She'd never seen the National Guard take over a cleanup operation. She'd never encountered anything classified buried in Youngstown soil. The question wouldn't leave her mind. What had they found? The first official statement came at 2 p.m. that afternoon. A spokesperson for the Ohio National Guard confirmed that a secure structure of unknown origin had been discovered during routine environmental remediation. The area remained under quarantine pending investigation. No further details were available. The second statement came at 6 p.m. The FBI had joined the investigation. The structure appeared to be a concealed underground facility. Federal agencies were working to determine its purpose and contents. The public was assured there was no immediate threat. By 9 p.m., news trucks lined Route 47. Reporters pressed against the barricades. Residents demanded answers. The National Guard perimeter expanded to include the surrounding blocks. No one was allowed in. No one explained what was inside. The breakthrough came on March 24th. Federal investigators accessed the bunker's sealed hatch using cutting torches. What they found inside required the immediate deployment of additional FBI evidence response teams, representatives from the Department of Homeland Security, and specialists from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. The bunker contained weapons, hundreds of them, military-grade rifles, explosives, ammunition crates stacked floor to ceiling. The cache also included forged identification documents, detailed maps of government buildings across Ohio and Pennsylvania, and handwritten manifestos outlining plans for coordinated attacks on infrastructure targets. The materials had been stored for years, perhaps decades. Investigators found preservation equipment, dehumidifiers, sealed containers, maintenance logs. Someone had built this facility with the intention of long-term storage and eventual use. The most disturbing discovery came from the documents. They contained names, dozens of them. People who had allegedly contributed to the cache, participated in its construction, or pledged support for the attacks outlined in the planning materials. This wasn't the work of a lone extremist. It was an organized conspiracy. The FBI began making arrests on March 26th. The first was Gordon Whitlock, age 57, a retired construction foreman who had worked on commercial projects across the Mahoning Valley for 30 years. Investigators discovered his name on construction permits for the industrial site dating back to 1998. Further investigation revealed he'd supervised the bunker's construction under the guise of installing an underground storage tank. The tank had been fabricated. The bunker was real. The second arrest was Pauline Driscoll, age 49, a property manager for the Cleveland holding company that owned the site. Financial records showed she'd facilitated payments to Whitlock and other contractors through shell companies. She'd also submitted false environmental reports to county authorities for over 2 decades, deliberately avoiding inspections that might have revealed the bunker's existence. By March 28th, 11 people had been arrested. They ranged in age from 34 to 68. They included a former police officer, a logistics coordinator for a trucking company, a retired high school teacher, and a volunteer firefighter. Most had no criminal records. Several were described by neighbors as quiet, helpful, unremarkable. All of them had been part of a militia group called the Sons of the Republic. The Sons of the Republic had existed since the early 1990s. According to FBI documents, the group espoused anti-government ideology and believed that federal authorities were preparing to seize control of local communities through martial law. Members stockpiled weapons and supplies in preparation for what they called the resistance. The Youngstown bunker was one of 3 such caches in Ohio. Federal investigators located the other 2 within a week, one near Akron, another outside Toledo. Each contained similar arsenals and planning documents. The scale of the conspiracy was staggering. Over 40 individuals had participated in the network. Some had contributed financially. Others had provided construction expertise, transportation, or secure storage locations. A few had written the manifestos and attack plans. None of them had acted. Not yet. The environmental survey that triggered the remediation had been random chance. The contamination was real. Decades of industrial activity had polluted the soil. The cleanup was legitimate. No one had suspected what lay beneath the surface. Casey Brennan had stumbled into a federal counterterrorism investigation. The legal proceedings unfolded over the next 18 months. Gordon Whitlock was convicted of conspiracy to commit acts of domestic terrorism, illegal weapons possession, and destruction of evidence. He received a sentence of 28 years in federal prison. During his trial, he showed no remorse. In his only statement to the court, he claimed he'd been defending liberty. Pauline Driscoll cooperated with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence. She provided detailed information about the group's financing, membership structure, and communication methods. She received 12 years. The volunteer firefighter, Nathan Cross, was acquitted. The evidence against him was circumstantial. His name appeared on a membership list, but prosecutors couldn't prove he'd participated in planning or construction. He returned to his community in Struthers. His house was vandalized 3 times in 6 months. He moved to West Virginia. Of the 43 individuals ultimately charged, 39 were convicted. Sentences ranged from 3 to 30 years. The trials revealed a network that had existed in plain sight for decades, operating beneath the surface of ordinary American life. The judge in the Whitlock case described it as one of the most extensive domestic terrorism conspiracies in Ohio history. The industrial site on Route 47 was never fully remediated. Federal authorities determined that the entire 12-acre zone required forensic examination. The bunker and surrounding soil were excavated and transported to secure facilities for evidence preservation. The property owner, facing potential liability, declared bankruptcy. The site was seized by the federal government and remains closed. Casey Brennan continued working as a county inspector for another 2 years. She was required to testify in 7 separate trials, describing what she'd seen on the morning of March 22nd. Defense attorneys questioned her credentials, her observations, her motivations. Prosecutors presented her as a credible witness who'd followed standard procedures and stumbled into something extraordinary. She described herself as someone who'd just been doing her job. In 2027, Casey left public service and took a position with a private environmental consulting firm. She now works on projects across the Midwest. She does not work in Youngstown. The National Guard checkpoint on Route 47 was removed in June 2026. The concrete barriers came down. Traffic resumed its normal flow. A chain-link fence now surrounds the site, topped with razor wire. Warning signs indicate federal property and restricted access. Most people driving past have no idea what was found there. In the years following the investigation, federal authorities expanded their focus on domestic extremist groups. The Youngstown case became a blueprint for identifying concealed weapons caches and militia networks. The FBI established a task force specifically targeting underground arsenals in former industrial zones. They found 6 more bunkers in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. None were as large as Youngstown, but all contained weapons, explosives, and planning documents for attacks that were never carried out. Specialist Kyle Richmond, the guardsman who checked Casey Brennan's credentials on March 22nd, was interviewed by investigators about his observations that morning. He described the site as routine until the bunker was uncovered. He'd been told it was an environmental cleanup operation. He'd had no reason to question it. He left the National Guard in 2027 and enrolled in college. He now studies criminal justice. Major Alan Kozlowski, the officer who had removed Casey from the site, testified before a congressional committee investigating domestic terrorism preparedness. He described the Youngstown operation as a textbook example of interagency coordination. The site had been secured, evidence had been preserved, and arrests had been made without public panic or violence. He retired from the National Guard in 2028. The Sons of the Republic effectively ceased to exist after the arrests. The few members who avoided prosecution dissolved the group and destroyed remaining materials. Online forums and encrypted communications channels went silent. Gordon Whitlock is currently incarcerated at FCY Terre Haute in Indiana. He has filed multiple appeals. All have been denied. His projected release date is 2052. He will be 83 years old. Pauline Driscoll is serving her sentence at FCY Alderson in West Virginia. She has expressed regret for her actions and has participated in de-radicalization programs. Her cooperation with authorities prevented additional caches from being activated and led to arrests of members who might otherwise have remained undetected. Nathan Cross, the acquitted firefighter, gave a single interview to a local newspaper in 2028. He claimed he'd attended only 2 meetings of the group and had never been informed about the weapons caches. He described himself as someone who'd been curious about anti-government ideas, but had never intended to participate in violence. He declined further interview requests. The families of those convicted have largely remained silent. Some continue to insist their loved ones were unfairly prosecuted for political beliefs rather than criminal actions. Others have expressed shock and shame. No one disputes what was found underground. Casey Brennan rarely discusses March 22, 2026. When asked about it, she describes the morning as surreal, ordinary until it wasn't. She'd expected to spend 2 hours inspecting contaminated soil and filling out forms. Instead, she'd uncovered the edge of a conspiracy that had existed beneath the Youngstown for decades. She thinks about the timing. If the environmental survey had been conducted 6 months earlier or later, the soil samples might have come from a different section of the site. If the remediation contract had been awarded to a different firm, excavation might have stopped at 4 feet instead of 12. If her schedule had been different, someone else might have been sent to inspect. The bunker might still be undiscovered. The weapons might still be waiting. She doesn't dwell on what could have happened. She focuses on what did. The structure was found, the arsenal was secured, and the conspiracy was stopped before anyone was hurt. That's what matters most. The concrete barriers on Route 47 are gone. The National Guard perimeter has been dismantled. Life in Youngstown has returned to normal, but the bunker remains in evidence storage. The weapons have been cataloged and destroyed. The documents have been sealed in federal archives. And beneath other industrial sites, in other cities, investigators continue to search. Because what was buried in Youngstown was buried elsewhere too. The question is no longer whether hidden arsenals exist. The question is where they'll be found next.